Yes, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football updates channel. It's a pleasure to be back with you here on this beautiful Friday morning, 39 minutes past the hour of 10, sorry, past the hour of 9 a.m. It's quite bright and sunny, contrary to what the last couple of days have been, because the last couple of days have been a bit rainy and cloudy, but looks like we are back to the sunny days. I do not know how long that will last, but at least it's a pleasure to know it's beautiful and sunny out there. Anyways, I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you had a wonderful night. Thank you so much for those of you that partook in our discussion last night. Thank you so much for your contributions. For those of you that have gone over to the channel, as I recommended, and watched those videos that we did release yesterday, talking about Uganda's readiness and, of course, East Africa by extension. When we talked about their readiness to host AFCON, then when we talk about why Michael Carrick will get the Man United job, we talk about Arsenal, we talk about racism, the headline in itself may not give you the full details of what the conversation is about, but once you break it down and enter in there, trust me, there's plenty for you to watch in that column. So please go ahead and watch that. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section, and yeah, I'll be glad to hear from you back. Interesting stuff. Anyways, we'll get to know what the results of that will be. But this morning, we'll be talking about European clubs who want in on the juice of the FIFA Club World Cup. We know it's the kind of tournament that generates lots of money for participants. That edition, the inaugural extended edition of the FIFA Club World Cup that was played over there in the United States of America during the course of the summer. Albeit we are yet to determine where the next edition will be played, one thing is with absolute certainty that we will have another edition that is destined for, I think, 2029, the summer of 2029. So a lot of clubs now want in a part of that because they saw teams like Chelsea, they saw teams like Juventus, teams like Real Madrid, among others, partaking that, and they got money. They got money beyond participation, beyond just participation. You had African teams in there, the likes of Mamelodi Sundowns, who got themselves some money. And let me tell you what, this idea of wanting to participate has nothing. Okay, it doesn't have nothing. Has very little to do with the football itself, but it has everything to do with the finances that are involved, And that's, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But if money is a motivating factor for participation for for most of these clubs, then I do not know. But it is what it is. Football is a commercial sport. It's a sport that generates lots and lots of revenue, and looks like Europe's giants want in on that, because while Chelsea were worried about their books, they knew that they were going to record a significant amount of money to those books, because I think the potential winner won themselves no less than 84 million pounds plus in terms of participation fees, winning bonuses, and being eventually crowned champions. So perhaps you may not be crowned a champion, but you may get some reasonable amount of money there, depending on also the stature of your club. We know that European teams were earning much more money than teams from any other part of the continent. We know we had teams from CONCACAF. We know we had teams from CAF. By that I mean African continent, South America. You had teams from Asia, the likes of Al Hilal. From South America, you had teams like Pyramides, like Flamingo, and things like that. So now, according to reports that are coming in, it's being reported that FIFA are receiving a bit of pressure from Europe's elite clubs, like Manchester United, like Barcelona. Now, that's according to, I think, The Guardian, according to reports that are coming through, that the Club World Cup will be modified. And this is now the what we are getting, that the Club World Cup will be modified to go from 32 teams to 48 teams in the next edition. This is due to the pressure from the elite European clubs that were left out, like Barcelona, Manchester United. Now, Barcelona and Man United were not the only elite clubs that were left out, because while the UK had teams like Chelsea and Manchester City, you had teams like Man United for all their global stature in terms of brand, were left out. Teams like Liverpool, who we know have been champions on 6 different occasions of asking in the UEFA Champions League. So they felt left out. I do not know if Arsenal feel the same way, but given that their owners are American owners in Stan Kroenke, plus his son Josh Kroenke, then I wouldn't be surprised if they want to get their hands in on some of that juice, in some of that honey from the FIFA Club World Cup. But also by extension, when you go over to Spain, you had, I think, 2 teams from Spain in Real Madrid and Atletico de Madrid. And then teams like Barcelona were left out. Then when you go over to Italian football, you only had Inter Milan and Juventus. Teams like AC Milan, teams like Napoli, teams like Roma could be also asking, why were we left out? Why were we left out? Because they were left out. And, we would like to know. Of course, the criteria for a qualification in the first place was as blurry as you'd have clouds on a day when it is threatening to rain. That's how it did feel like, because if it is about winning something, I mean, Atletico de Madrid, what are they won? What are they won? What's the criteria? You took Chelsea, who had last won the UEFA Champions League in 2021. Fair enough, if you wanted to go that far back. But then you also took Man City, who had won it in 2023. And then we are thinking to ourselves, okay, don't Man United and Liverpool have bigger pedigree, or is it just about recent years? Because, of course, if you go with recent years, Liverpool qualified for recent years in as far as winning it in 2019. So that's not too far back as well. So anyways, so some of these European giants are saying, well, if you're going to run the FIFA Club World Cup in that manner, and it's going to generate all sorts of revenues of that magnitude, then clearly we want in on something. We want in on it. We want to be a part of that. We want to get something of that. We are interested in partaking that. Like I said, it has very little to do with the football, because when it comes to the football itself, the same clubs, the same people are complaining of fixture congestion, and you cannot have it both ways. You cannot have your cake and eat it at the same time, because if you want an easiness on fixture congestion, then you cannot be advocating for joining or for taking part in the FIFA Club World Cup. In any case, you remember part of the arguments that we were making prior to the start of the season involved the idea that Man City had partaken in the FIFA Club World Cup, albeit they never got so deep in the competition. You had Chelsea, who had made it to the final and eventually won it, and how that would impact on their summer plans in terms of preparation for the subsequent season and things like that. So in any case, if you're coming, because it's coming at the back end of a very long season, just like the World Cup, just like you have the Euros, and just like you're going to have AFCON 2027 come next year. So that, by extension, means that as soon as you release these players from their respective clubs, they go for international duty for preparation for those major tournaments. And in this particular case, basically, players went and had a week off, and then they came back to prepare for the FIFA Club World Cup. You remember when we were talking about Xabi Alonso, after being appointed as the head coach at Real Madrid, he was literally tossed into the deep end because his first assignment was to take Real Madrid to the Club World Cup. So he never had the ample time to work with them pre-season and try and conjure out how he wanted them to play, how he wanted them to behave. In the long run, eventually, his fingers were slightly burnt. And I say slightly because it's not that like he was having terrible results, very poor run of form before his sacking. Basically, Florentino Perez did not take to heart their loss to Barcelona in the Supercopa Hispana following last season's dominance by the same side over Real Madrid. So they decided to part ways on mutual agreement. But usually we know that's a PR statement. Oftentimes somebody is called the shots, and they had to part ways with Xabi Alonso. So it's quite an interesting conversation or interesting debate to have, depending on the requirements. Um, for me, I'm an advocate of players getting a bit of more time off and realistic and loads of money. Uh, there's this kind of a little too much of everything. Why in recent times we've had um, more longer term injuries, and the part or the cause of that, I would want to believe, is this ever increasing number of games that some of these players have to play. That they have to be part of, that they have to partake in. When you look at over the last couple of years, now here's the imagination or what you should expect or what could likely happen. Excuse me. Imagine a player is played all league games or almost all league games. They played in their domestic cup competitions. They played in the UEFA Champions League. And let's say by the end of the season, they've averaged 50 to 60 games. Then they have a tournament to go to. And remember, you have a tournament to go to that will culminate into you playing, let's say about what? Anywhere between 7 to 10 games, depending. So for the last edition of the FIFA Club World Cup, you had to play, because it's a neutral ground, you had to play about 7 games. For those that reached the final, I think you played 3 in the group stages, then round of 16, quarterfinal, and semi-final, and then eventually the final. Then also, in the same calendar year, you have international games, whether it's an international friendly, whether it's the World Cup qualifiers, the Euro qualifiers, whatever it could be, whether it's the UEFA Nations League, that too comes asking for your attention. So by the end of it, you may have players, especially players from teams that go deep into competitions, including domestic cup competitions, that they end up playing many, many games. And in the long run, it's going to take a toll on them. Over the last couple of years, Real Madrid has suffered lots and lots of long-term injuries in the form of ACL injuries and things like that. Players like Thibaut Courtois, Eder Militao twice, players like David Alaba, Dani Carvajal, among a couple of others, have been on the receiving end of very extended injuries. Of course, when you look around elsewhere, you have the likes of James Maddison at Tottenham Hotspur, Dejan Kulusevski with his issues. You've had Jurgen Timber, you've had Gabriel Jesus. When you go to Man United, I don't think they've had somebody be out for a very long spell with a nasty injury. But it's only to sample for you that as the fixture schedule gets busier and busier, that puts more stress on the bodies of those players, and subsequently they're bound to give away. If the trajectory of increased number of games continues, at the end of the day, we may see a lot of players retiring, a bit early. When you go back early in the days, when I'm talking about, I think the early 2000s, you had lots of players retiring anywhere between 33 and 36. And fast forward, you've had players trying to increase on that retirement age. Players like Santi Cazorla, players like David Silva, try to do it. Look at Cristiano Ronaldo, look at Lionel Messi, look at Gigi Buffon, look at there's that cohort. Look at Luka Modric. So you've had those kinds of players who are saying, yeah, I may be 38, I may be 39 or even 40, but I'm still going to push on for another couple of years or two. Look at James Milner, in yesteryears, by now he would have already been retired, perhaps retired 5 years ago, but he's still playing. And while games had increased nonetheless, my point is that if you continue increasing them, then those players could end up giving away quite easily or earlier than they would have loved to. So anyways, that is what is happening from that side, or from that sphere of the conversation when it comes to the FIFA Club World Cup. Um, Okay. Then also, this is according to Passy of the Telegraph. He says a former Arsenal director, Edu Gaspar Daoud, is nowhere near any key decisions at Nottingham Forest, and it is alleged that he was not consulted in the Shondich sacking. Nuno Espirito Santo would purposely walk the other way if Edu was walking towards him. Now, again, we spoke a little bit about this yesterday, and it's only merely an extension of what we had been discussing. Because he goes on to add that Nottingham Forest have sacked 3 managers, spent almost £200 million on players, and are in a relegation battle, but Edu Gaspar remains at the club. The exit of Forest's global head of football feels inevitable. And that's the reports from Istanbul. We spoke about this, that if you are to measure this or you are to rate Edu Gaspar Daoud's performance at the club in as far as Nottingham Forest is concerned, is that it will be one hell of a disastrous failure, because when he joins Nottingham Forest, he joins them in high regard, having worked with Mikel Arteta at Arsenal for quite some time to excuse me, to establish this new Arsenal project that everybody thinks should be going on to win major silverware by now. And part of his job or his role as global head of football has come under scrutiny, and because of where Nottingham Forest find themselves. They do find themselves in a relegation conversation. Yet last season, they were in a conversation for UEFA Champions League qualification. Yes, they fell short of that and ended up qualifying for the UEFA Conference League before it was upgraded to the UEFA Europa League, given the boardroom decisions that were made by UEFA in the wake of Crystal Palace's breach of the dual club ownership rules by one of their then investors in John Textor, the American businessman who also owns Olympic Lyon. Now, that notwithstanding, you fast forward to look at the guy who was held in high regard, like I said, coming from a big club where he had done fairly well. And now he goes to Nottingham Forest, who have European football under a very good manager in Nuno Espirito Santo. Then he goes there and his views are contrary to what that of the manager are. Now, I do not know whether there was a clash of egos or they just couldn't see eye to eye right from the onset and onwards. But one thing is with absolute certainty, because what we did here from sipping through the cracks in as far as Nottingham Forest were concerned is apparently that Nuno Espirito Santo wanted to have a much more smaller squad compared to what Edu Gaspar Daoud envisioned in his argument. Nuno Espirito Santo, that while they had responsibilities on the continent, a smaller squad was much more easier to manage and maintain and keep everybody happy. Whereas Edu Gaspar Daoud was of the view that you need a squad broad enough to compete on all fronts, that if you're going to go in cup competitions, you're going to have to rotate your squad. And that should give you an edge, especially in the early stages of those competitions, that you would stay very competitive, extremely or very competitive in the Premier League, while also carrying on your responsibilities in the UEFA Europa League. Speaking of the UEFA Europa League, Victor Pereira yesterday guided Nottingham Forest to their first victory there under his charges when they beat up against Fenerbahce by 3-0. I think goals from Morillo, Morgan Gibbs-White, and Igor Jesus were enough to give Victor Pereira or the desired results ahead of the return leg in the UEFA Europa League playoff. So once that relationship doesn't work out between them and between him and Nuno Espirito Santo, that's when Nuno Espirito Santos, that was widely reported about by The Athletic, about the disagreements that lay within the head of global football at the club and the manager in Nuno Espirito Santo. Before we knew it, fast forward, Nuno Espirito Santo went in the media to sort of critique his boss or to call him out, saying their relationship had sort of dwindled. They had grown apart, or he felt they had grown apart ever since the incoming of Edu Gaspar Daud, because Edu Gaspar Daud was being plugged in to fit in the space between the owner, Evangelos Marinakis, the Greek businessman, and then, of course, Nottingham Forest boss or head coach in Nuno Espirito Santo. Now, I think he did not appreciate that well enough, and even though they did bicker, and a lot of people seem to think he talked himself out of the job, I never felt at any one point that their relationship was broken beyond irreparable damage, that Evangelos Marinakis could not summon his employee for a round of table talks, for a cup of coffee, and they managed through their differences or grievances, particularly those coming from the head coach. And then if you have a head coach or a manager with whom you do not agree on strategy with the sporting director, then it's basically going to be quite very, very difficult because, like I said, Edu Gaspar Daud was quite critical, critical in how they recruited in the summer, So one would want to think that because they went on a summer spending spree and they spent quite a significant amount of money, bringing in players like Tanindoy, bringing in players like Omari Hudson, Dylan Bakwa, and these are players that cost no less than £35 million. We're talking about Omari Hudson, £37 million, Danny Ndoye, £36 million, Dylan Bakwa, £30 million, James McAtee for Manchester City for £30 million, and Node Kalimuendo for £26 million, Igor Jesus for £16 million, Nicole Savona for £11 million, Chia Cunha for £10 million, John Victor for £6 million, Kaubano for £5 million, Luka Nets for £2 million. Alexander Zichenko had come in from Arsenal on loan, although he has since left the club, as well as Angus Khan. So they had gone on quite the spree when it came to their summer spending, and yet none of that paid out. You remember also, in addition to that, there was the loan deal for Douglas Ruiz, who came in and turned out to be a poor signing. Now, I do not want to believe at any single point or level that any of those players were poor or not good enough, but it simply boiled down to the idea that they couldn't make it work. They recruited well, had the squad depth, because remember, they also kept players like Morgan Gibbs-White, players like Callum Hudson-Odoi, players like Ola Aina, Ibrahim Sangare, and Elliot Anderson, and things like that. So Chris Wood, Timothy Awoni, So you had lots of, excuse me, stretching my bones a bit. You had all those players still part of that squad, and like I said, for Nuno Espirito Santo, he did not agree with a lot of that. So the appointment of Edu was supposed to elevate Forest to the next level under their mega ambitious owner in Evangelos Marinakis, and this is according to the Telegraph. But after his arrival in July, that's 2025, following a period of a gardening leave, a statement outlined Edu's remit to oversee all football-related functions, including recruitment, performance, squad strategy, and player development. So when it came to squad strategy, that's where they could not see eye to eye with Nuno Espirito Santo. They ended up in opposite directions, and they decided Evangelos Marinakis, in his lack of wisdom, in that moment, and I'm not trying to say he lacks the wisdom overall, I'm saying in that moment, he decided to part ways with his manager in Nuno Espirito Santo and kept Edu Gaspar Daud. Among the other contentious issues that had been subject to debate or discussions, and this within the Nottingham Forest circles, was the brand of football that Nuno Espirito Santo played them under. They wanted perhaps more entertaining and attractive football. And I remember saying this at the time. Nottingham Forest do not have the luxury of needing entertaining football or attractive football. They are under the need for football that wins games. It's that simple. Football that wins games. And once you build that culture, once you believe that, you build that belief and begin getting top tier players in, as you continuously build your squad, then you can start to focus on the brand of football, on the type of football, But those, among other things, led to his walkaway. Anyways, it is what it is. Let's move on to the weekend review because, like I said yesterday, the Premier League match day 27 gets underway. It will be match day 28 for the likes of Arsenal and Wolverhampton Wanderers, who had the fixture in midweek in which Arsenal squandered a 2-0 lead to drop 2 points, 2 precious points against Wolverhampton Wanderers. Now we go into a weekend where when there's no early kickoff, that's on Saturday, but games kick off at 6 p.m. sharp. When Aston Villa take on Leeds United, Brentford will be at home against Brighton and Hove Albion. Chelsea will entertain Burnley at Stamford Bridge, while West Ham will be at home against Bournemouth. Manchester City will be at the Etihad Stadium to host Newcastle. Now, the game between West Ham and Bournemouth comes at 8:30 p.m., while the Man City-Newcastle game comes at 11 p.m. God willing, inshallah, if granted the time, we will do a watch-along for that game tomorrow. And then on Super Sunday, we have Crystal Palace at 5 p.m. against Wolverhampton Wanderers, Liverpool making the trip to the City Stadium against Nottingham Forest, while at the Stadium of Light, Sunderland will be up against Fulham. All those 3 games kick off at 5 p.m. and then later on at 6:30 p.m. At 7:30 p.m. you have Tottenham Hotspurs entertaining Arsenal. Man United, you will have to wait until Monday night at 11 p.m. when you play away to Everton. So that's the run of fixtures that will be coming your way. And in as far as things are concerned, given that we've spoken enough about Arsenal yesterday night and in the morning, you will indulge me and we'll kick things off with games that come on Saturday, and perhaps with maybe later in the night, we'll get to look at games that will come on this Sunday. There's only one place to begin, and for me, that's Man City, because they are the other team in the title race. They are the team breathing down Arsenal's necks, are trying to, dethrone them on that steep or on the summit of the Premier League log, where Arsenal, having played a game extra compared to Man City, are only 5 points ahead. At one time, those points were 7. They go to 6. They were 4. So it is what it is. So we're talking about a Man City side who, based on their history or pedigree, is they know how to handle this phase of the season, and that they have reasonable experience both within their squad and tremendous experience within their manager, Pep Guardiola, to go through this kind of period at the tail end of the season. We've seen them go on winning runs where they go on to win 14, 13 games straight on and eventually scooping up Premier League titles. Now, as you sort of think of that, you also worry about Arsenal, who they are chasing down, because Arsenal do not have that experience. We're talking about a Man City side who have a fairly good run of games coming up. One, they play Newcastle. After Newcastle, next weekend, they'll be up against Leeds United. That's away from home. They'll play Nottingham Forest. They'll play West Ham United. They'll play Chelsea. So if you're Man City, and again, you're serious about this, chasing down Arsenal, then you must leverage on where Arsenal's shortcomings have been identified in dropping crucial points against teams like Brentford and Wolverhampton Wanderers and be winning your games. So in the next 1 of 5 games that Man City have on their hands as a responsibility, if you drop points against Chelsea, it will be a bit excusable. I mean, you already drew in a 1-1 draw in the first leg, even when Chelsea did not look at their very best, under Enzo Maresca in some of his later days. But it becomes crucial that you stay well within there. Because Man City, out of the remaining 13 games that they have to play, They're 13, 14 at the moment. Oh, let me see. No, 12 games, right? Yes, 12 games that they have left to play. They just need to win all of them. If they can't do that, then the Premier League title will be theirs eventually, or possibly. Yeah, it will be theirs because that will have included beating up against Arsenal. So, first of all, they they come up against a side that have fallen short of our expectations in as far as Premier League performances are concerned. And their manager in Ed Howe, that's for Newcastle, has acknowledged just as much. When you look over Newcastle's side, they do not have it any easy because the next one of fixtures is going to take a toll order on them. First of all, they play Man City, after which they have a game against Everton, then they'll play a game against Man United, a game against Chelsea, and then a game against Sunderland at home in the Twainware Derby. Now, when you look at all these games, yes, they beat Man City in the first leg by 2-1. I think, was it a draw against Everton? They lost to Man United by 1-0 in the first leg. I don't remember what the result was against Chelsea, but I don't remember them winning either. So, you have that. So it's quite going to be interesting to see. Like I said, Pep Guardiola is a man with lots of experience when it comes to this phase of the season. When you look over to the last 5 fixtures, they've only lost one game, and that was against Man United. Otherwise, they have 3 wins against Liverpool, against Fulham, quite dramatic against Liverpool, against Wolverhampton Wanderers, and their other slip-up being a 2-2 draw against Tottenham because they took a 2-0 lead in that one. And then in comparison to Newcastle, on the other side, Newcastle have had their struggles. I mean, they've lost what? They've lost 3 of their last 5 games. They've drawn against Wolves. They lost to Aston Villa, lost to Liverpool, lost to Brentford before recovering with a 2-1 victory against Tottenham Hotspur. So that's why I was telling Arsenal fans that cared to listen yesterday that the only way Arsenal win the Premier League title is if they take care of their business, because they cannot bank on Manchester City's opponents to help them stop Man City, to help them cause Man City to falter. Because look at a team like Newcastle that you want to help you cause an upset against Manchester City. It's not that they're incapable of doing it. It's just they don't know how to do it because they've not done that a good number of times. Yes, they've beaten them 2-1 earlier on in the season at St. James's Park. But when you go over back to the last other 4 games, they've not won any other. They've drawn 1, and that was at St. James's Park in a 1-1 draw. That was last season. But then including 2 losses at the Etihad Stadium, both in which they failed to score a single goal, and then another 3-2 loss to Man City. So really, they do not have the sort of record that gives you the confidence that they're going to go against Man City and win all 3 points. Perhaps they do not need to win all 3 points, but at least cause them to drop points. You cannot bank on that, really. We're talking about a team or a fixture that has been played at least 51 times in as far as the Premier League is concerned. And Man City have 32 wins out of that compared to Newcastle's only 9 plus 10 draws. So that tells you it's not a game that produces many draws. It's not a game that produces many wins for Newcastle either. It's a game that Man City continuously dominates, and that will be the point of confidence for Man City going into the weekend too. Having won that game against Liverpool, that's the huge bounce that they needed. That's the huge motivation that they needed, because from thereafter on, they went on to a routine win against Fulham. Now, when it comes to Fulham, we know the conversation. They've not beaten up against. Fulham have not won or drawn a game against Man City in 20 fixtures across all competitions, and that was a pre-Pep Guardiola. So that was bound to happen. So, and yet when it comes to injuries, Newcastle have had their fair share of worries across the campaign. As we speak, Bruno Guimaraes was missed through a hamstring injury. Lewis Miley, Emil Kraft, Fabian Schär, Tino Livramento, Johan Wissa, and Steven Botman. But we're also talking about the Newcastle side. Yes, they've been so poor in the Premier League, but they come in this game with high spirits, having beaten up against Tottenham Hotspurs in their last time of asking, but also having beaten up against Aston Villa by 3 goals to 1 in the FA Cup, really, regardless of the fact that Aston Villa were down to 10 men. And then that victory against Karabakh in the UEFA Champions League by 6 goals to 1 is quite a huge lift in terms of mentality and spirit if you want to go and get a result away to Manchester City. I do not think you're going to get any better run of form that gives you the sort of momentum and belief that you can go to the Etihad Stadium and win a game of football or perhaps pick up a point. Like I said, all teams have different aspirations at this stage of the season in terms of where they want to finish on the Premier League block. You have the Newcastle side who are still 10th with 36 points. And yet, if they win that game, or if they were to beat up against Man City, they have an opportunity to climb to as high as the 8th place with 39 points, hoping that all the teams above them currently in Bournemouth and Everton can squander or can, drop points. And that would also put them just a point behind Brentford and 3 points behind Liverpool. So if you're Newcastle, the UEFA Champions League dream is not far from reach, or a European place is not far from reach, particularly the UEFA Europa League. It depends on how you handle yourself going from here now and on. Now, on the other side, you have lots of speculation that this could be Pep Guardiola's final season. The question is, how would he want to sign out after a decade at Manchester City? You would bet yourself that he wants to sign out in the best way possible, and there is no better way possible than winning the Premier League title, or for the 7th time in 10 years, for you to walk out, for you to bow out with your head held high of what you've achieved. Even if he doesn't, of course, win this season, he will still hold his head high that he's done a tremendous job with Man City. But how about an icing on the cake? And that perhaps will be winning at this. Like I said, when you look in their squad, yes, they've had a lot of changes. They're a team going through transition. But let's not forget they have about 10 players that have experience in winning a Premier League title under Pep Guardiola at that Man City side. About Erling Haaland, Jeremy Doku, Matas Nunes, Mateo Kovacic. You have players, John Stones, Ruben Diaz, Nathan Ake, Rico Lewis. Nico O'Reilly, Rodrigo Cascante Hernandez, Bernardo Silva, Phil Foden. You have that composition of players in a club that is in a space of transition, that know what it means to win a Premier League title, that have won it before, that know how to deal with the pressure, which is contrary to their rivals in Arsenal, who do not know how to deal with the pressure, have not won the Premier League title, and are just looking to get it done, So for me, that's where the contention is. That's where the big debate is. When it comes to Newcastle's midfield, of course, in the absence of Bruno Guimaraes, it leaves their midfield oftentimes lightweight compared to what you'd love, because we are more accustomed to the midfield trio of Bruno Guimaraes, Sandro Tonali, and Joelinton. Speaking of Joelinton, he did return in their Champions League game against against Karabakh, and he came on in the second half. So basically, you wouldn't want to go to Man City and you're playing with Joe Willock alongside Sandro Tonali. You'd want at least something more than that. Now, in that game, quite interestingly, Nick Voltmada was played as a 10 with Anthony Gordon leading the lines. I do not know whether Ed Howe was trying out something, but it is what it is. Then you have non-performing players like Anthony Elanga, but also you'd want your defense to be spot on. They do not lack the figures when it comes to their defense. Of course, Nick Pope in goal. You look at players like Kieran Trippier, Lewis Hall, Dan Ban, Malik Thiaw, that centre-back pairing. In midfield, for me, that's where the questions would come. So if you're going to go to Man City, you're better off bringing in a Joelinton to start alongside Tonali to give you that bit of grit and fight in that midfield compared to a Joe Willock. Perhaps if you'd want to add, then you would want to play a Joe Willock at the tip of that, you play Joelinton, Joe Willock with Sandro Tonali at the tip to form that bit of a solid kind of midfield. And then you sacrifice either Anthony Gordon for Nick Voltmada, or you sacrifice Nick Voltmada to retain Anthony Gordon with Harvey Barnes and Anthony Elanga on either side. Then they have a Yohan Wissa. of course, on their side. Very good players that Newcastle do have. But also, I must note that for Man City, whereas the lineup can be predicted, well, you never know when Pep Guardiola is going to choose to, chop and change his team. So what the one thing that we can guarantee is Gianluigi Donnarumma, for as long as his fit, is number one. You could see Matthias Nunes at right back. Sorry, at right back. You could see Ryan Atnori at left back, or Nathan Ake, John Stones alongside Ruben Diaz, or you could see even John Stones in midfield. Um, Rodrigo Cascante in that midfield, alongside Bernardo Silva, Phil Foden, or Ryan Chucky, depending on whichever way he chooses to set up. The other time he played with Nico O'Reilly playing in midfield, and some people were taken aback of how, or were surprised how is the left back playing there. Well, he's a midfielder. They only assigned him to play at left back because he can and he did. So, but naturally, he's a midfielder. The same way you see Amaz Lewis Kelly at Arsenal, kind of profile of a player. So for me, I do not see how Ed Howe gets outsmart Pep Guardiola. I often wait to be surprised because football is full of surprises and anything can happen. But on this one, I'm going to go with the leap of faith and think that Manchester City are going to win that game by 3-1 in my prediction. I could be right, I could be wrong. So do not bet your arm on it. It's just a prediction. Then in the other games, perhaps Chelsea. Chelsea are a team with responsibilities, and their responsibilities are as simple as beating up against some of these smaller sides. Unfortunately for them, last weekend they failed when they drew that game against Leeds by 2-2 after going 2-0 ahead. Now, it looks like it's something that has happened to the Giants this season. Arsenal suffered the same fate against Wolves, Man City against Spurs, Chelsea against Leeds United. But putting that aside, Chelsea had a brilliant run of form, and Liam Rasinia winning against Brentford, Crystal Palace, West Ham, Wolverhampton Wanderers, and almost won against Leeds, but it never happened. So, but they are one of the most informed teams that you find in the Premier League, in as far as the Premier League is concerned. While Burnley on the other side are still struggling. Two losses, two draws, and one victory, I think, in the last 5 fixtures is not an encouragement to say that they will go to the Stamford Bridge and get a point of football, a point, unless Chelsea choose to be complacent in that game, which I do not want to assume that they will be complacent. I remember saying this when Chelsea had the games coming up against Crystal Palace, West Ham, Wolves, Leeds, and then Burnley. I said those should be must-win fixtures for Chelsea if they want to finish within the top 4. Yes, a draw against Leeds does not paint them in sort of in good colors, but I think they've done well, if that's the record that based on what our askings were of them. So in terms of Chelsea's upcoming assignments, they're going to also come up against difficult opponents because they have a game away to Arsenal, they have a game away to Aston Villa, at home against Newcastle, and away to Everton. So those are really, really tough fixtures coming up for them in as far as their pursuit of fourth place is concerned, or the top, or being within the top 4, Then when it comes to the fixture itself, it's a fixture that Chelsea have dominated. 19 games played between the two sides, and as far as the Premier League is concerned, they have 13 wins, 5 draws, and only 1 win for Burnley. And I do not suspect that tomorrow will be the first time or will be the second time that Burnley get a win against Chelsea. Certainly not. In the last 5, Chelsea have been quite dominant, winning 3 of the last 5 and 2 draws in there. That is what has happened between the two sides. So I'm going to go. When it comes to Chelsea, we saw the return of players like Richie James, very crucial. Wesley Fofana, Trevor Chalobah in my backline. Kukurea will be absent, but Joreo Hato can play there. You're playing against Burnley. Robert Sanchez in goal, Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez, Cole Palmer, Joao Pedro, Pedro Neto, and maybe Alejandro Garnacho to set up simply that way. So really, I don't see how Scott Parker masterminds a victory against Liam Rosinia, unless otherwise. So I think Chelsea will go ahead and win that fixture by about 3 goals to nil. Then also Aston Villa against Leeds United. There is the significance of Aston Villa is where they find themselves on the Premier League table within the top three. So they would want to keep that place. They would want to maintain that slot, or perhaps even get to do better. But it is what it is. They went on to drop some really, really serious points along the way, but they remain within reach because they are only 8 points behind the leaders, Arsenal, and about only 3 points behind Man City. Yeah. Hi, LFC. Good to have you back. You say 6 weeks. Okay. Yes. Okay. Always a pleasure to have you back. Always a pleasure to have you back. So really, that's what where Aston Villa find themselves in. In terms of players, of course, they've had, unfortunately, they've had injuries to critical players like Boubacar Kamara, like Yuri Tillemans, John McGinn, Andres Garcia, Matty Cash, but Matty Cash could return. Yes, they got a red card for Marco Bizot, but at least they kept that for Lucas Digne. So you'd have Emiliano Martinez return to goal. Pau Torres, Tyrone Mings. Tyrone Mings scored in their 1-0 victory against Brighton during the last time of asking, in as far as the Premier League was concerned. And yeah, they have the player power. When it comes to that midfield, in the absence of Boubacar Kamara, you have an Amadou Onana, you have an Emi Buendia, although he's a 10. You have a Douglas Luiz who will return on loan, and he's done fairly well already, or at least better than he was doing at Nottingham Forest and things like that. Excuse me. Up front, Oli Watkins, Tammy Abraham, Garnacho, Leon Bailey, it's just a good team overall. Just a good team. Then on the other side, you have a Leeds team that want to leave themselves a bit open. Goodmanson, Jaden Bogo, Amapadu in that midfield. They have some quite serious players that are capable of hurting you, including Dominic Calvert-Lewin, So very, very interesting stuff there. Very interesting fixture. It does, promise to be. We're talking about an Aston Villa side who have not. We're talking about an Aston Villa side who have. Their recent home form has not been quite very encouraging, because when you look at the last 5, it includes 2 losses against Everton and against Burnley. Against Everton and against Brentford, losing both fixtures by 1-0 at home. And then you have a 2-0 win away at Newcastle, a 1-1 draw against FC Bournemouth before the win against Brighton and Hove Albion. So it's that kind of Aston Villa that we're talking about, They've been a bit nervous. But like I said, they have injuries to critical players that sort of hampered that bit of momentum that they had to their side. So I'll cut them some slack. Nonetheless, I expect them to beat up against Leeds United, at least by 2-1. It won't be an easy game, but I expect Aston Villa to come out on top, to conjure out a way to win against that side. So that will be my prediction for that game, So yeah, that's the expectation on that front. So that's my prediction for that game. Quickly, moving on, the game between Brentford and Brighton and Hove Albion. To be honest, Brighton and Hove Albion have had a bit of a difficult run of form, including Fabian Hatzler, not sort of emulating what Roberto Di Zerbi had, the kind of mark he had left at the club. It's been a bit of ups and downs in there for their results, and they do not have form on their side in as far as Brighton are concerned. Losing 3 of the last 5 games is not a good run of form, including 2 1-1 draws against against Bournemouth and Everton. So that's what they've had on the other side. Losing to teams like Fulham, losing to teams like Crystal Palace and Aston Villa, not the kind of results that you'd want. But on the other side, we're talking about a Brentford side that forced Arsenal in a 1-1 draw, went away to Newcastle and won a game of football, went away to Aston Villa and won a game of football. Last got beat by Nottingham Forest at home by 2-0, and then prior to that, had lost to Chelsea by 2-0. So when we get to the tail end of the season and we're giving our end of season awards, one of the people that we'll be awarding will be Keith Andrews, because myself included and so many others were doubters for what Keith Andrews would bring to the table. We're talking about a set piece coach who had come in, about or approximately 6 months prior to the exit of Thomas Frank, who's since gone to Tottenham Hotspur, where he's not lasted a year before he got his own sacking and has since been replaced by Igor Tudor. So that's the kind of guy we're talking about. But I do want to believe that if you've beaten up against Aston Villa, you've beaten up against Newcastle, nearly beat Arsenal, really, then it should be motivation to go and beat up against, Brighton and Hove Albion side, who do not have very, very good results to their side or have been struggling over the last couple of games. And yes, Brighton beat up against Brentford by 2-1 in the first leg, but it's the kind of fixture usually where the home team has the advantage, although the last two visits for Brighton to the GTEC Stadium have ended, one in defeat and another in a goalless draw. However, I'm going to go for a 2-1 victory here for Brentford over Brighton and Hove Albion in that fixture. Then, as I will look to wrap it up for the Premier League preview, that's specifically for the Saturday games. The other game for us to look at is West Ham against Bournemouth. West Ham against Bournemouth. We know what West Ham need. West Ham need to win their games to survive relegation. They're in the relegation battle. They are 3 points below relegation, and that's 3 points below Nottingham Forest and 5 points below Tottenham Hotspur, because it's Nottingham Forest and Tottenham Hotspur that occupy 17th and 16th places respectively. So West Ham need to fight their way out of that. However, their fight has not been aided because of their own inconsistencies when it comes to posting results. You go away and beat up against Tottenham Hotspur by 2-1, beat up against Sunderland quite well by 3-1, squander 2-0 lead and lose to Chelsea by 3-2, win against Burnley and then draw against Man United. So on fair assessment, you would say they've done well in the last 5 if they've managed to win 3, draw 1, and lose 1. In any comparison across the 5 of the Premier League, you'd say they've done well, But they come up against a very stubborn side in FC Bournemouth, who have 2 draws and about 3 victories in their last 5, including beating up against Liverpool, Wolves, and Everton. So those are the kinds of opponents that you want to beat up against if you are Bournemouth and you want to finish well within the European places or have at least an attempt on them. So they've done well recovering from that blip that they seem to have for a period of about 2 months between November and December. So Andoni Iraola is doing quite tremendously well when it comes to that. So I'll give it to him, and I'm going to go with my gut feeling, and I say I do not see West Ham winning this one. It's not that it's not a winnable fixture for them. I just see Bournemouth looking a bit too stubborn for them to have comfort. It could end, given what West Ham's needs are, I could settle for a 1-1 draw between the two sides. Not that there's been many of those in as far as the meetings between both sides have happened, but there's been quite a number. In fact, by the way, surprisingly, you'll find that none of either teams has won this fixture in the last 5 times of asking. All 5 have been draws. So you have 17 games played. Amongst West Ham have won 4. West Ham have won 5. Bournemouth 4, and they've had 8 draws. If there's anything then you can bank on a 1-all draw between the two sides. That's my prediction anyway for those games. So that's for the Saturday preview for the games that you should be expecting to come your way in as far as the weekend is concerned. And then, like I told you, we'll get to preview the Sunday games in our late night podcast. But in as far as tonight is concerned, you have a game in each of the other four of the other top five leagues in Spain. You have a game between Athletic Bilbao and Elche. You have a game between Mainz 05 and Hamburg SV in the German Bundesliga. In the Italian Serie A, you have the game between Sassuolo and Hellas Verona, while you have a game between Brest and Olympique Marseille in the French League One. Speaking of other leagues, of course, tomorrow in the Spanish La Liga, Real Sociedad are up against Real Oviedo. Real Betis take on Rayo Vallecano. Osasuna will be at home against Real Madrid, while a poor or a very inconsistent Atletico de Madrid will take on Espanyol. Then in the German Bundesliga, you have a game between Bayern Munich and Eintracht Frankfurt. That's on Saturday. You have one between FC Cologne and Hoffenheim. You have Union Berlin take on Bayer Leverkusen. You have Wolfsburg take on Augsburg. You have RB Leipzig taking on Borussia Dortmund, while in the Italian Serie A, Juventus will take on Como. Como's last game was the 1-all draw between them and AC Milan, and Nico Paz scoring in that one. Which you like, Brazil or France in football? Brazil. Brazil all the way. And then in the Italian Serie A on Saturday, Lecce against Inter, Cagliari against Lazio. Then in the French League One, Lens against AC Monaco, Toulouse take on Paris FC, while Paris Saint-Germain take on Metz. Speaking of German teams, yesterday I did enjoy watching Stuttgart beat up against Celtic by 3-1 in the UEFA Europa League. So perhaps before we wrap this one up, let's even have a view of what those results were in the UEFA Europa League. You had Bologna beat up against Brann by 0-0. Dinamo Zagreb lost to Genk by 3-1. Fenerbahce, like I told you, were at the receiving end of the 3-0 beating at the hands of Nottingham Forest, while PAOK lost by 2-1 against Celta Vigo. Celtic lost 4-1 against VfB Stuttgart. Sorry, not 3-1. So, but a very, very impressive game that they had there in Stuttgart, because they had one goal cancelled out by, was it Dimitri? Or not Dimitri? Is Dimirovic. Yes, Dimirovic. He scored a goal there, but it was ruled out for offside. But I thought they had a very, very weird game for Stuttgart. Then Crvena Zvezda beat up against Lille by 0-0, while Ludogorets beat up against Ferencváros by 2-1. And then Panathinaikos and Victoria Pilsen settled for a 2-all draw. In the UEFA Conference League, I can only read you the game between Crystal Palace and Mostar, and that game ended in a 1-all draw. So those are the UEFA Europa League playoffs that are ongoing, or that went on yesterday. Excuse me. So you had the playoffs, and they will continue next week. We know what transpired in the week in the UEFA Champions League. There are teams that have a whole mountain to climb. There are those that I do not think will climb their mountains to the top. Teams like Juventus, who lost 5-2 against Galatasaray. Teams like Karabakh, who lost 6-1 to Newcastle. Inter Milan have a mountain to climb, one that they can afford to climb. I just do not know whether they will overcome it, because Bodo Glimt have proved to be very stubborn, but they lost their game by 3-1. You have Atletico de Madrid, who shared the spoils in a 3-all draw, and it didn't look pretty for Atletico de Madrid, for a team that had a 2-0 lead in that game. Then you have a team like Olympiacos, who got beat at home by 2-0. I do not think they will be able to overcome Bayer Leverkusen. And then you have Benfica, who go to the Santiago Bernabeu in the wake of losing by 0-0, in the wake of the racism allegations from Vinicius Junior against Gianluca Prestiani, the right back from the Argentine right back, was speaking about this racism issue with Ismail Dakabachi-Gongo. And he was saying, for him, racism is a society problem and not a football problem. Football just gives it a platform for it to be showcased. And we spoke about perhaps Argentina has a racism issue because it's not the first time an Argentine player has been accused of being racist, because Enzo Fernandez was to accuse of a similar incident. And in Argentina, the media has been trying to sort of exonerate the player by saying he did not say mono to mean monkey to Vinicius Jr., but he said hamono, which means something entirely different. So really, and that kind of thing. Of course, people like Jose Mourinho did not paint themselves in any form of glory to seem to suggest that Vinicius Jr. had brought it on himself to be abused because of him celebrating before the Benfica fans. But I do not think there's any justification whatsoever that we can use to qualify or defend racism in the game of football. Unfortunately, racism is within the fabric of society, and we just have to continue trying our best to rid ourselves of such a bad vice. But anyways, it is what it is. So for those of you that want a deeper conversation about racism or our views on racism, please go over to the channel and watch part 2 of the interview that I had with Ismail Dakava Chigongo. And then also you can also watch the part 1 where we get to talk about Vipers, we get to talk about Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania in regards to their preparation or readiness for hosting AFCON 2027. We talk about the FIFA decision in the wake of the case between Kitara and Vipers for that missed game. He had some really, really convincing arguments in as far as Ismail Dakava Chigongo is concerned. That's the head of sports at Nation Media Group, the biggest media conglomerate in Uganda, with brands like NTV, Spark TV, Dembe FM, KFM, Monitor newspaper, Enyanda. I think there's another brand that I'm forgetting. But yeah, that's the kind of group we're talking about. Anyways, guys, allow me to wrap it up here. Thank you so much, 469 if LFC, and every single one of you that has managed to be part of this morning's podcast. I want to wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Stay blessed. Let's catch up tonight, later on in the night, for our late night podcast. Bye-bye for now.